Dr. Ishrat was coming to visit us, and we thought we'd take advantage of his coming here and ask him to tell us about what's happening on the macroeconomic front. Uh, मेरी आवाज़ नहीं सुनाई दे रही? Oh, अच्छा. तो हमने सोचा कि we'll take advantage of Dr. Ishrat coming here. He's been associated with Pakistan's macro management for a very long time, and he's seen many episodes of stability and enlighten us as to whether we are at that stage where we can talk about macroeconomic stability. And nobody's better equipped than Dr. Ishrat to tell us about that. We also have on our panel with us Akila Mumtaz. Akila Mumtaz will look at stability from the private sector angle. She has been CFO of all the important organizations, private organizations in the country for the longest time. Her most current position is as CFO of a major company of jazz, the telephony people. She's also the chair of Punjab Skills Development Fund, which is a very successful Section 42 company. She's also on the board of Punjab Population Innovation Fund. She was previously CFO LUMS, so she comes with a lot of background and will, I'm sure, ask the right questions about whether we are at the point of macroeconomic stability and whether we've done the spade work that's needed to make sure that it is indeed a stable macroeconomic situation that will last a bit. We also have with us Hadia Majid. She is chairperson of the Department of Economics at LUMS. Hadia is one of our leading researchers, policy researchers. So terrific that she's with us today. And everybody knows Ali Khizr. If you don't read his articles in the newspaper, you're surely on his WhatsApp group. They come to you. So Ali Khizr is an acute observer of day-to-day developments on the economic front. So I'm sure we'll have a very good discussion among them, and I will invite people in the audience to join the discussion. It has to be participatory. I have in mind a broad structure. The first question is, are we there? Is this too early for us to say we've achieved stability? State Bank tells us that inflation is now in single digits, 5-6%, which is fantastic. What other matrix should we be looking at to think that we have arrived at a point of stability? And so that's the first question. Let's start with asking Dr. Ishrat what he thinks about whether we are there, and then we'll get inputs from other panels members.
First of all, let me thank Ijaz for asking me to come to Lahore for the CDPR discussions. And to my surprise, he said that I have to pay for this by being present here at this policy exchange, which I have been following for quite some time through the CDPR website. My very short answer to your first question is no, we are not still there. This is a transition phase, and the transition has to be anchored in some very solid foundations. Otherwise, this is not going to work. There are three imperatives which I feel are lacking at this moment to provide the smooth transition towards a sustained and inclusive growth path. Number one is the political polarization in this country, which has a lot of repercussions as far as the investor confidence is concerned, as well as the business climate is concerned. The uncertainty premium for investors today is quite high. And for the first time, I noted that the investment ratio, instead of moving upward from 15 towards 20, it has gone down to 11. And that is very, very alarming to me. The second imperative is that you have a complete resurgence of the terrorist activities in the country. And yesterday's example, where your negotiators for the Chinese IPPs were killed in front of the entire security forces which guard the Karachi airport. And this is no longer Balochistan and this is no longer KP. This is Karachi. So how can you expect anybody really trying to make any decisions about the medium or the long term? And the third one is more tricky. That is the gap between the rhetoric and the reality. And with due apologies to a lot of my colleagues who are my friends in politics, we make a lot of commitments that this is the last program of the IMF and we are not going to knock on the doors anymore. But have they done their spade work in order to reach that point or not? And I'm not sure that they have. And if they have, would they have the political courage to take tough decisions if the traders of Liberty Market, Jinnah Supermarket, and Tariq Road come out on the street and block the streets protesting against the imposition of their taxes? Or whether they will be able to face their MNAs in a coalition government when you impose agriculture income tax. And these are the questions which I feel are critical as far as the transition path is concerned. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. You have you have amplified the concept of stability, and quite rightly so. But Hadia, the IMF program defines stability in a very narrow sense. Okay, your exchange rate is stable, your inflation has come down, the current account deficit has come down, and your exchange foreign exchange reserves are building up. Those are the signs of that the IMF program considers in a very narrow definition of stability. And Ishwat is quite right in amplifying the concept of stability. But just looking at it from the very narrow perspective, do you think we're there?
I mean, इसमें अगर आप export versus imports को ही देख लें, चलें अगर हम imports को कम curtail कर पाए हैं, what are the circumstances through which we have curtailed imports? What is the impact of that on our industry, on the backward and forward linkages in the economy? And then what have we thought about in terms of building that industrial base? I mean, आज ही मैं अपने students से backward and forward linkages का जिक्र कर रही थी, and हमेशा हमारी steel mills की बात होती है, automobile industry की बात होती है, we talk about the sugar sector. And one of the first things that my student asked me is that if we know that there's certain sectors that are just not delivering, why do we continue to provide them with subsidies? Why do we continue to take them along and ensure and actually spend a very dear foreign exchange in making sure that they stay afloat? And that goes back to the politics that Ishit Saab talked about. I mean, this the political economy of where we are today is in such dire straits. We're just not talking to each other. That even when all of these macroeconomic indicators start looking good, when you start looking at the fundamentals are just not there. I mean, we're thinking about it in terms of the balance of payment, but one of our major fundamentals is just the human capital. We talk about the demographic dividend that Pakistan has, but yes, we have one of the biggest youthful populations, the big youth bulge. It's us and sub-Saharan Africa. But our youth is not finding jobs. Our youth is not digitally connected. Our youth doesn't have the skills that is required. And there's now so much work that is taking place that there's just not that skill level that our youth needs to have to really push through and meet this new frontier. And usme I can't not talk about what is happening to the internet. Because we want our youth to have, and we want our industries and our firms to be internationally competitive. One of the major areas that we are looking at today is what is happening in the digital space. I mean, that's what the Nobel yesterday also showed us, the importance of AI and machine learning. Not only do we not have the necessary skills as a population, we don't even have the infrastructure to really support that kind of leg up in the international arena. So I don't know, maybe that's the pessimist economist in me. I think we're all prone to just looking at the problems. I see too many problems to really be, I don't know, optimistic about the single digit inflation that we're looking at today.
So, turning to you, Akila, we may have achieved stability according to the matrix that the IMF program measures, right? Which is great to get the next installment of IMF lending. But what really matters for the economy is the private sector responding to those metrics and saying, great, we are on the right tracks. We are now willing to put some money in this country. Are you willing to put some money in this country based on what we've achieved in macroeconomic terms?
I think before challenging the investor, we should first try and understand what we are offering the investor. And each one of us, हम जिस एरिया से बिलोंग करते हैं, जिन लोगों के साथ इंटरेक्ट करते हैं, तो हम कहते हैं कि ये चीज़ इम्पोर्टेंट है and this is why the country is failing. And everybody, when they start putting their own 2 cents forward, तो then we realize कि हाँ ये pile जो है ये बढ़ता चला जा रहा है over the last 20 years instead of diminishing. लेकिन fundamentally अगर आप सारे थोड़े से let's take a step back and let's look at what Pakistan is. Now Pakistan is a country जिसमें 250 million बंदा है, give or take the latest numbers that we private sector people used to convince our board that it's an important country. इसमें youth bulge है, इसमें natural resources हैं, लेकिन for some reason or the other we are not allowed to trade with our neighbors. For some reason or the other, we constantly face food shortages. For some reason or the other, when we have food surpluses, we refuse to give it out to our neighbors. For some reason or the other, it's a country, every single one of you will tell whoever you're talking to that wheat is an extremely important crop. Yes, yet it's a country जिसमें silos नहीं exist करते grain के कि आप wheat को store करें. मुझे, when I come to these places, what I see is a lot of big conversations happening, but actually जो interventions required हैं to fix things are small. They're actually not that big. The problem is that we keep continuing to focus on the big things and we don't do the small interventions that actually need, that is required for us to go somewhere. आप आज अगर इंडिया से अपनी ट्रेड खोल दें या अफ़गानिस्तान के साथ ट्रेड खोल दें ऑन अ रेगुलेटेड बेसिस, आई थिंक हमारा फॉरेन एक्सचेंज का कुछ मसला हल होना शुरू हो जाएगा. अगर आज हम ये डिसाइड करें कि हम लोगों ने इन्वेस्टमेंट जो है वो हर चीज़ में नहीं करनी, ग्रेन साइलोज़ में करनी है, मे बी हमारे फूड शॉर्टेजेस का इशू रिजॉल्व हो जाए. मे बी इफ़ वी सिट टुगेदर educated people and start looking at all the IPP contracts, maybe we will decide that there's something that can be done about the mess that we've tied ourselves into. So I do think that as an optimist, as somebody who is discovering that private sector ki intervention can actually act as game changers, I do think that there is a lot of positivity that can come out of the country. What I'm less hopeful about is कि ये government की तरफ से आएगी. I think it will continue to be an initiative कि जो private sector लेगा. Everywhere where at least we go or where anybody from the telecom goes, वो आपको सबसे पहले ये बताएंगे कि इस मुल्क के अंदर financial inclusion जो है वो ना government लेकर आ सकी है, ना banks लेकर आ सके हैं, वो telecoms लेकर आए थे पहली दफ़ा. अगर इसी तरह अगर दूध की बात कर लें कि treating milk as a commodity, from taking it from where it was a commodity to taking it to a wealth generating instrument, या भैंस को taking it as something कि जो घर की आपकी एक चीज़ होती थी to an asset for a farmer, वो नेस्ले लेकर आया है, वो गवर्नमेंट नहीं लेकर आया. So I do think that private sector की initiatives जो हैं will be required to take us to the next level. How we sell that story is where I think the government needs to do a better job. Because हमारे दो at least regulators हैं, एक FBR है, एक state bank है. State bank का काम है investment को ना लेकर आना, because every person who's bringing in money over here, they're saying कि पैसे लेकर आ जाओ तो मैं वापस नहीं लेके जाने देंगे. FBR का काम है कि instead of adding other people into the tax net, what they're trying to do is make sure कि जो multinationals पैसे दे रही हैं उनको इतना डराया धमकाया जाए कि their sponsors don't feel comfortable with the unpredictability of the tax net. And those are areas where I think if the government focuses a lot more, they can do much, much better to help create an environment where private sector can operate.
I'm going to open up the discussion to issues of whether this stability that we see, the early signs of stability, whether this can be sustained. Essentially, that's where most of the commentary so far has been. But I can't resist asking Ali the same question, because Ali actually keeps track of minute developments on exactly the metrics that we all talk about when we talk about short-term stability. Ali is a well-known journalist. Ali, you were optimistic in your last piece on macroeconomic stability. Do you want to tell us more about it?
Yes, it's on. Essentially, the stability I talked about is very well explained by the other participants. It's about the IMF matrix where you see interest, current account, the balance of payment being in control, and that stabilize your currency, and then your inflation comes down and all that. So that's pretty much there, and then you're running fiscal primary fiscal surpluses. Last year you have that. This year you have a very high target. So those kind of a metrics is there, and we got this kind of a stability. Is I put it this way, in a way, I mean, as a cancer patient, you went through a very severe chemo session, and that helped in terms of remission. But you got other issues as well. So the good blood cells are killed as well. So the growth is not there. The private sector has shrunk. I mean, the most recent number I tell you that today the number came with all the stability is like the urea sales are at multi-years low in the last month. So that's an alarming number, I would say this. And then when you say any other commodity and any other private sector, when you talk about the companies, they're not selling, then the sales are not growing, and the job opportunities and employment opportunities, so the growth is absent. So that's pretty much there. So the issue is why we gained stability, and what is there to talk about is because what happened in the last 2 years, this could have crippled the economy right there. Now you got to pass a few years, maybe like in the past 20 years, let's put it that In 2004, your interest rate were 2%. In 2009, your interest rate were 15%. Not your time, but 2004 was your time. And then 2015, your interest rate was 6%. 2022, your interest rate are 22%. Maybe 25, your interest rate are back in single digit. So what's not? What happened in 27, 28? So it's a right where global and local factors are there and that. But I think some changes may happen because of the compulsion now. And of course, we have adjusted the lifestyles and economy has slowed down significantly. And we back to a level which was perhaps somewhere 2016 or something. And economy is coming to that level and adjusting to that. That's not a good thing to have, actually. You're shrinking yourself. And the good thing what happening is about, like, one thing you talked about wheat. There's not going to be any wheat support price going forward. If they comply to the IMF, and they did last time, there's a kind of creative destruction happening. But but that can go bad, but that can help in growing other crops, like, where government is not present, like maize, such a big success and all that. So you could grow something else. My friend is sitting, his sugar cane and sugar industry might be affected by that, but he's from the area where sugar cane and sugar industry is competitive. That would remain there. But why would happen in other areas where they're not competitive? So things may start happening this way. Energy.
So I think
Yeah.
you're going much further ahead in the discussion than where I want to be. We'll get to those questions, but let me ask my second question, which is that Ishrat, more than anybody else, knows that we have reached such points before. We have brought down interest rates. We have turned the current account in the positive territories. We have primary fiscal surplus. We've been there before. We are good at meeting the IMF conditions in the initial periods. We've demonstrated that over and over again. Most recently, since the transition to democracy in 2008, this will be the fifth time that we have demonstrated that we can achieve stability in terms of the matrix that I talked about. But it's a very short run kind of stability. It allows us to get the next tranche of the IMF, or maybe the next two tranches of the IMF, but it doesn't last. Ishrat, is this different this time?
I think it would very much depend on how much spine the policymakers have in order to face very difficult and unpopular decisions. My argument, which I have argued publicly, is that if you have these 3 years of roadmap where you can take all those reforms which you know and everybody in this room knows, which are the prerequisites for sustained and inclusive growth, there is a political dividend which you will find in year 4 and year 5 when the economy really moves up. And you can go to the public and say, look, sorry you guys had to bear all these pains in the first 3 years, but we worked hard in order to pave the way that these pains disappear and the gains started accruing. That, I think, is what my philosophy is, that you have to take those decisions now. If you keep on postponing them, then I don't have any hope at all that we will be out of this crisis situation. You mentioned about the years when we actually told the IMF prematurely that we don't need you because our reserves had gone up to $16 billion, which was almost 5 months of import coverage. And we said, this is a poverty reduction facility, give it to Africa, we don't need the money. The growth rate, as you remember, and Naveed would remember, it was 6% per annum for almost 7 years. And the poverty reduction went down to almost 20% from 30%. So all the indicators. Foreign direct investment in Pakistan, which has never been that high, was $5 billion in 2007 and 2008, when India, with a 8 times larger economy, had only $12 billion. So it can be done because those decisions were taken. But look at that same government. They refused to adjust the prices of fuel and commodities after the global financial crisis because they were angling for elections in 2008, and what a disaster the country went through. So this is an example which I quote, that if you have the willingness to bear the burden, you will have the gains. But if you just revert again, then you are back to square one. So you have lost all what you have done so far.
I'm really happy that Ishrat concluded the way he did. I was a little bit concerned that Ishrat would paint a very rosy picture of Musharraf years, when we all know that it didn't end well. So I'm really glad he pointed that out. Now, what didn't end well in Musharraf's time is exactly what didn't end well in the People's Party's government time, in PMLN earlier government time, in even Imran Khan's government time. And so the question is, will the cycle repeat itself this time? We have short-term macro stability. We have done this before. But the hard work that needs to be done to avoid getting into this problem. The cycle यही है ना कि you overeat, right? You get all kinds of problems, health problems, then you pull back and you resolve those problems temporarily. But the underlying factor of overeating hasn't gone away. So as soon as you think you have resolved the problem, you start overeating again. So that problem is what Ishrat is pointing out. And I think it'd be fantastic to hear a little bit more about the overeating problem, which means that our wonderful ability to run up large fiscal deficits, our wonderful ability to start importing far in excess of what we export, will those bad habits come back to haunt us before we know it, Akila? And how's the private sector? And how's the private sector going to help?
Dr. Saab, jawab, we export more than we import. I go back to what I said earlier. I think for too long we've been trying to export something from Pakistan, put it on ships or on airplanes, and then send it all the way to Europe or to the US. बहुत बड़ी market है, डॉलरों की market है, and then try and sell it over there. आपको पता है, when I was working as a meat farmer, I discovered कि चाइना जो है वो हमारी खालें और जानवरों के eyeballs और उनकी intestines जो हैं लाहौर से कराची लेके जाते हैं, कराची से वियतनाम लेके जाते हैं, वियतनाम से चाइना लेके जाते हैं. ठीक है, they do that entire circle of half the world to be able to take something that is perishable because they value it and they consume it. Why can't we have direct access to our neighbors? That is my question, and that's why I also think political will is not our problem. Our problem is this artificial concept of national security that we've created. And this, I don't know whether it's a Musliman concept of trading or what, that says कि आप मुनाफे के साथ कारोबार नहीं कर सकते और आप अपने neighbors को जो हिंदू हैं उनके साथ तो कुछ भी नहीं कर सकते. So it's a huge problem. If you're a country with a little bit of sea जिसके अंदर आप सिर्फ अपना कराची पोर्ट को limited तरीके से इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, if you're a country that has Iran as a neighbor, Afghanistan as a neighbor, China as a neighbor, India as a neighbor, and you're not trading with any one of them, and with the only party that you're trading, you're doing it in terms that nobody has access to, nobody understands, and nobody knows, you are not going to be able to change the future of this country. We need to open ourselves to the rest of the world, let the private sector come and choose whether they're willing to take the risks of instability that exist in this country. There are thousands of other countries, not thousands, but there are quite a lot of other countries in the world जहाँ पे equal level of instability exist करती है, Turkey being another one of them. वहाँ पे इन्वेस्टमेंट क्यों हो रही है? आप थाईलैंड जाएं, वहाँ पता करें कि जी इन्वेस्टमेंट किसने की थी. थाईलैंड ने अपने पैसे नहीं लगाए थे, सारा चाइनीज़ पैसा आके वहाँ लगा हुआ है. आप बैरूत जाते हैं, वहाँ पता चलता है कि सऊदी जो इन्वेस्टर्स हैं उन्होंने लाके पैसा लगाया है. नो कंट्री ग्रोज ऑन इट्स ओन. You need investors to come in, you need somebody to accept the risk that comes with that country and then move on. If we have political instability, but there are somebody, if there's somebody who's willing to invest here, we will get investors in. The question is, are our regulators and our bureaucrats sitting within the regulatory framework willing to let people come in, put in their money, and then take it out when they need to or when the time comes. And till the time कि वहाँ पे regulations जो हैं वो stable नहीं होती, जब तक IMF के pressure में FBR harass करना लोगों को बंद नहीं करता, उस वक्त तक आपकी investment change नहीं होंगी.
So, normally economists talk about a stabilization and structural reform. Structural reform is what gives you sustained stability, whereas IMF stabilization program can give you short-term stability. What both Ishrat and Akila have done is to amplify this concept of structural reform, and Akila has actually gone on to talk about my favorite topic, which is regional trade, and the centrality of regional trade as part of the structural reform you need to do in the trade sector of the economy. So they've really expanded this idea that you don't just look for short-term stability, but look at deeper structural reform that's needed. Hadia? Sorry.
Sorry, डॉक्टर साहब, मैं थोड़ा सा ना यहाँ पे आप एज एन इकोनॉमिस्ट आप लोग स्टेबिलिटी की तरफ जा रहे होते हैं. इन्वेस्टर जो है वो स्टेबिलिटी की तरफ नेसेसरीली नहीं जाता. एन इन्वेस्टर आइडेंटिफाइज कि इनस्टेबल या अनस्टेबल जो टाइम पीरियड्स होते हैं उसके अंदर आर्बिट्राज अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ होती हैं, विच मीन्स योर return on investment can be more than if you invest that same money in a country like the US. And that is why an investor is never or not necessarily looking for stability. Anybody who invests in Pakistan should not be looking for stability. They should be looking for arbitrage. They should be looking to make money in a way that they cannot make anywhere else. And anybody who's investing here is doing exactly that. And this is a fundamental, important.
No, I think that's a good point because
But I
Ishrat,
think we have an exchange, so I would very humbly disagree. You know, you have a high risk and high reward, and you don't have the same investor risk appetite everywhere. So there is a small segment of the investors who are willing to tolerate very high risk because they think there is a high reward. But generally, if you look at the empirical evidence cross country in developing countries, the variable which comes out is not the political stability, but it is the continuity, consistency, and predictability of economic policies, irrespective of what the political regime is. And that's what we are talking about, and Ijaz is talking about, is that what stability is.
I think in your I'll come to you in a second. Go ahead.
Give an example to what you both said. That is the only $1 billion plus projects investment came in the last 15 years are in IPPs, and we know how they are dealing with IPPs. High return, volatile, and now their course of actions to reprofile and terminate. So just that's the kind of economy we live in.
So I think stability, not just in terms of the few variables that I mentioned, but consistency of policy, political stability, something that Ishrat mentioned initially, is equally important to attract investments, and not just that you have low inflation. It's important, but if you don't have political stability, you won't get the investor interested. Hadia, let's get your views on this concept of stability taking the short-term stability that we talked about to the deeper questions of stability and structural reform. Are you optimistic that we will get that stability, we'll get the structural reform?
आई थिंक मैंने अपनी टोन जो है वो पहले आंसर में सेट कर दी थी. That's a tough. Because I work on gender, I work on labor, और उसमें तो मुझे बहुत बुरे आसार नज़र आते हैं. Because हर 5-6 साल पे there's this कि अच्छा we must get more women into the labor market, right? But we don't see that kind of sustained, consistent policy outlook when it comes to tackling these difficult issues. So जो अभी जैसे जब डंडा होता है सर पे तो हम वो कर लेते हैं, जैसे IMF का डंडा हुआ तो we were able to, and उससे पता चलता है कि there is that space to be able to take those difficult decisions, but to take those difficult decisions in a sustained manner, that's where we seem to be, we're unable to do it. Why we're unable to do it is a very interesting, I think, phenomena, and that's why Pakistan has been the base for so many case studies. I mean, Easterly's famous work on where the classic case of growth without development is not a coincidence that we're that classic case. And I think that is coming from the fact that even when we've had the fiscal space, the period of high growth that we've seen for many years, we haven't seen that kind of deep reforms. Some of it perhaps has to do with the politics within Pakistan. And I think that's where the optimism can come in. We were, right before the panel, we were talking about what's been happening in Islamabad. And I think as difficult it is for ordinary citizens, because it really disrupts our lives, it is something that has continuously now been there for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And no matter what, it hasn't dissipated. Some of it, I think, has to do with just the kind of frustration that the youth has, with the lack of employment, lack of opportunity. You see that when you look at our country from a natural resource perspective, we are not a poor country, yet we are not seeing that sustained increases in income per capita. We're not seeing that dissipation of growth for all of our population groups, and that feeling of discontent is now spreading. And in this, I'll come back to the digital media and I'll come back to digital technologies. There, we cannot deny the force of digital technologies and connections. So I've seen this in my own work. I've seen that women who haven't been able to participate in the labor market from a physical perspective have been able to participate in the labor market from a digital perspective. So why not extend that to understand what's happening with the youth or the political arena? People who don't have that space to mobilize physically are finding that space to mobilize digitally. So it will be really interesting to cut the population up and think about what are the spaces that are being carved out, where are we seeing consistent changes, that even when you have political instability, you can continue to see some sort of reform take place. So maybe a smidgen of optimism. Yeah.
So, Ali, your articles have been giving a feeling of well-being on the macro front, but you always have this undertone. Yeah, it's well-being, but all is not well. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, of course, all is not well because we haven't really have any reform as such, and when you have a pulse measuring, and then you see what anyone around I see is investing within Pakistan. From outside Pakistan, I don't see that. I know what Jazz is thinking. I know what others are thinking. It's nobody is, they're like happy that whatever they have invested over there is giving them good return. And if there is a time they can get the return out as well. That's party for them. But investing back, nobody's thinking on that. So that's my worry is even so. Coming to the structure reforms and the policy, what we talk about for the past 30, 40 years, Ishrat and you guys are doing there for your whole life, the incentive structure in the policy is to create the incentive structure for the reforms. Somehow the policy framework we advocated didn't create that. But I think then the compulsion is there which we are creating that. she rightly pointed out about that it's not a political instability; it's a notion of security stability, and that's been there because that's been paying dividend to this country for the past 50 odd years, and the dollars that came in Ashad Saab governorship time, that's again a dividend to some political and geostrategic interest, which costed this country so much in terms of the law and order situation and all that, and that's been happening for the past 40 odd years. But that stopped. That stopped. The global realignment happening, and that has changed. That money is not coming in. And the friends and all that, those were like showering money like anything, they're not giving you money like this. So we are on our own. That's a good thing. So we are on our own. That's a good thing. Export, imports. Now every firm I talk to is thinking about creating export, is about moving to areas where they can have exports. We'll find out what our competitive advantage is. We'll find out what our comparative advantage is. We don't know. We just talk about things. We don't know when the companies they swim into it, they'll find out and they are working on it because they know that domestic demand is not enough to work on this. And that's happening. Energy is a big mess. And IPP is not that, but that solar prices coming down, the battery prices coming down, the distribution grid and everything, that's happening in the private sector already. Education is a big problem. The technology they gave us, the 4G they gave us, the phone they gave us, now people are working on giving this right kind of education, right kind of nudges where they enhance the productivity. Think about it. An household of low middle class living in Samnabad, family of 5, father being diabetic and mother is there working little bit and father working and all the earning maybe collectively 100,000. You give them some kind of skill, 15, 17-year-old kids and 40-year plus parents. If someone get a good skill to earn $10 a hour kind of job where you don't need any certification, some skill, that increase that income of that household 5 times if they work 20 hours a week. That's kind of changes I'm seeing happening, and these kind of changes just multiply and everything, and then that will open up with the regional trade as well. I'm telling you, this security state would. No, you talked about India and so many hidden words. Why don't you talk about Iran? I mean, we could have solved the energy problems, and we are already doing that. Like 1/3 of our imports are coming from Iran. It's somehow supporting some people, but that's lowering your bill because you get the cheap number. So you open up the Iran, you do that, and we trade with one neighbor, and doing too much of trade within our bill. We're doing too much of loan within the neighbor. Now that neighbor, we have times to negotiate on that. We are on it as well. But it's happening, and plus the political thing which you talk about in Islamabad in 4 5 years. I think the kind of result I see in an election, the youth has given you the outcome, and I'm telling you, the youth will bring the people to give them the better economic and social opportunities. And I see middle class people coming in that because we have to get out of this elite and the power structure, and then the youth is taking us out. And I think this is going to happen in the next year, 10 years or so. You talk about the women participation. I see it's increasing like anything. I see so many women are driving bikes without any pink initiative. They're doing by compulsion. They're buying from the market. I've seen so many girls within my social network and people I know after 2022, the kind of economic hardship where the one man can't earn. 2 people are earning. That's a compulsion. So husband is who was like not happy with women working is pushing the woman to work. That's happening. It's happening. It just take
I
time.
think I think I think this is great. Getting so far from this conversation is the change is going to be delivered by the private sector, by the ordinary citizen, by the young people of this country, and that is already happening. What the IMF should do is to keep the government off their back. Okay, just discipline them fiscally, just discipline them on how to manage the exchange rate. Okay, if you overvalue the exchange rate, this impulse for every firm wanting to export, this will go away. So we need the IMF to discipline the government. And the private sector will deliver, and private citizens will deliver. That's the message I'm getting from this call, which is actually a very good message. My biggest concern with the IMF program for the longest time was that it's the low income groups who end up paying the price, because the upper income groups have assets, and inflation is the biggest cost of IMF programs. The upper income groups have assets which are protected from inflation. They have dollar assets, they have real estate, etc. All of that is protected against inflation. But the low income groups, the fixed salaried people, they are not protected against inflation, and therefore they end up getting hurt a lot. Eva and I in the CDPR, we're actually looking at some labor market numbers, and I'm actually surprised that real wages have kept up. Real wages have not gone down, which is what I feared might have happened over the years. We'll put that out in the Insight series, but the real wages have kept up. But just as an anecdote, I called Surjit Bhalla in Delhi the other day on WhatsApp, and I said I was just going to do a one-off test. What does he pay his chauffeur, and what do I pay my chauffeur? And if you take into account the price differences, it's not very different. So, 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 so the market is adjusting to the macroeconomic stabilization. The costs, the inflation and wages are adjusting for inflation. As long as we keep the government off the back of people and not intervene by messing up the exchange rate, not intervene by borrowing too much in the market, the private sector will deliver. That's the message I'm getting. And with this, I want to open it up and get views from the audience. Let's see who wants to go first.
I'm Majaz, a mechanical engineer from NERST, working for El Barrio Engineering. My question is from Ali Saab, that as you mentioned, our energy is in a mess, and but the silver lining is that solar prices are going down. The solar panel price, which was 15 years back, it was $3.5 per watt. Last year, it was 40 cent per watt. Today it is 9 cent per watt, but our textile industry is begging for 9 cent per kilowatt hour from government. Why they are not going? Why they are not coming to us? Will give them energy for 4 cent. The solar power projects. So what is the issue? Why the textile industry and other industries are always looking up to the government? Why they are not going for renewable energy solutions like solar, like waste to energy? Thank you.
Well, they're going perhaps to your competitors. Everyone is having solar, but the problem, I like Kohinoor has done that in the last week. This Interloop has done it, and I can name 10, 15 companies, and so many others are doing it. And today I was talking to someone from government who's into solar thing is facing a problem because the minimum load. But the grid keeps for industry is shaving off to the solar, and that there's more cry on the net metering by consumer, but that's much less. 1 megawatt of solar company getting up around like about 130 houses going up. It's a big difference on all that, and everyone is doing that, but they still need other power as well, because solar can give you certain. They have a limited space where they can put solar. Then they get the solar energy for the hours that the sun is shining. They don't have storage is expensive. That's getting cheaper as well. But even if it gets cheaper, as well as you might know that the panel batteries in Karachi are now costing 290,000 rupees for 5 kV, which was 400,000 6 months ago, and much higher last year. So they're falling like anything, but still they'll be able to have shave off 50, 25, 30% of load of the industry. The rest they would rely on grid, or they would rely on the base load plants. They all have captive plants. They used to have that. Either they work on that, use the furnace oil or gas, whatever, or they rely on the grid. So they will, and they are, and they need that. But since government is giving them electricity at 22 cents, or 16 cents if you take the taxes out. Of course, you take the taxes out for them. It's 16 cents. Yeah. So they need it 9 cents. So they're increasing the solar and other renewable into the mix to bring it close to the 9, and that's happening actually.
देखिए आई होप एवरीबडी रियलाइजेज ओवर हियर कि हम 10,000 सोलर प्लांट्स भी लगा देंगे, कैपेसिटी पेमेंट आपको फिर भी देनी पड़ेगी. सो फंडामेंटली सोलर इज नॉट द आंसर. नहीं, इसके ऊपर तो मेरा ख्याल है हर रात टीवी पे डिबेट हो रही
इस पे
होती
टीवी
है.
पे कल डिबेट होती है ना. I'm just giving, I can give you the numbers.
There is a real issue out there. With solar, the discos will lose their best customers in terms of customers who pay their bills. They are moving to solar. Overall disco deficit is actually increasing as a result because they haven't plugged in the leakages in the system, the line losses, technical line losses, the theft. Those issues have not really been addressed. The capacity payments to independent power producers, the initial contracts and the high prices associated with those contracts, none of that has improved so far. And they're losing their best customers. So the discos are going to get into more trouble. Question is, how will we address this?
Yes. Look at Karachi Electric. This was 42% losses, T&D losses, and recovery was much lower than what the discos were. Today, it's come down to 15% because it's a private sector.
Yes.
They have taken consumer base from 1 million to 3.4. The Imran Khan government decided that in winter we have surplus electricity because the gas is really, so they reduce the prices of incremental units which will be sold, and the demand went up. So if you give it to the private sector, like the telecom, which we did in 2005, besides the opposition of the PTCL and everybody, look where we are, because Jazz is saying, I can give you at 4 cents, and Telenor is saying, I'll give you 3 cents. Create competition. So I think we are on the wrong horse. We are always treading. Just go and do it. Delhi and Bombay both have improved since they have given it to the private sector and their competition.
So the question is, in order to make the solar work, we have to get discos to compete.
Absolutely.
And the only way they'll compete is if they are privately owned. Otherwise, there's no incentive to compete. The question is, are we going in that direction? Yeah, please.
So, just a bit controversial question. There was a statement made that Karachi had an accident that's going to have an impact on foreign investment, but Balochistan and KP not going to happen that much. So, is that the normal thinking around here? That is one. Two, grain silos were mentioned earlier. In 1969, the US government proposed the first grain silo project, government of West Pakistan, and they've been doing it for every 5 years again. So what could be done, which hasn't been done, to convince the government to actually allow these grain silos to be put up by the private sector? What?
Yeah, Mike, I think you misunderstood what I said. In KP and Balochistan, it has been going on for quite some time. 44% of Pakistan's area is Balochistan, and therefore trying to figure out as to what is really happening from the terrorism is a quite difficult security. Karachi is well guarded. You have all kind of forces there, and then at the airport, which is so centrally located, you have a killing of the 2 Chinese. I was just giving you that example. That is a very different thing. On the silos, I again do not see. I was in Okara, and I saw these warehouses are being built by the private sector because the State Bank has created this e-warehousing scheme whereby they discount the price on the e-receipts. and the private sector is responding. I think government will make a mess of it. I was deputy secretary in the finance department in government of Sindh, and we had the Sindh Road Transport Corporation, and we got 100 buses from Sweden, and after 3 or 4 months, 30 of those buses were out of operation. So we made an inquiry. All the parts of the 30, 40 buses were transferred to the private sector buses. So the government is not really in the business of doing business because there are no incentives for them. So I think we have to create competition, and I totally agree that the FBR and the regulatory agencies have to be more prudent in their dealings with the private sector. Do competition. There is a difference between genuine profit making and rent seeking. Unfortunately, in this country, every private sector venture is associated with the rent seeking. That's what our propaganda is. Who will take the initiative if making money is bad? You have 16 billionaires in the Forbes magazine list from India, and they are adored, they are adulated, they are admired. And here people are saying, oh, don't tell me I should disclose my entire wealth because I will be chased. This is not how this works.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Dr. Rishad because हमारे जो billionaires हैं आजकल वो सारे के सारे या खुद मुल्क से बाहर बैठे हुए हैं या उनकी जो second generation है वो सारी के सारी मुल्क से बाहर जा चुकी है. So you
2
look
साल
at
से उससे पहले क्या होता था वो भी तो आप कहें ना. We get stuck with the short term, but what was happening in the long term? That I think we should see. They were investing in this country. We have conglomerates by the private sector.
I'm not sure we have billionaires left anymore.
Anymore.
I mean, I've just done analysis of.
मैंने देखा जवाब.
देखिए
so there-
and that's a question that I actually want to table to you because जो डेटा हमारे पास आता है from money moving hands, from spend that's happening on the telecom side, from other information that we get when you use your phone, उससे हमें कहीं भी नहीं नज़र आ रहा कि पाकिस्तान की इकोनॉमी जो है वो श्रिंक कर रही है. जब आप डेटा दिखाते हैं तो आप कहते हैं कि सिर्फ जो ग्रोथ है वो एग्रीकल्चर साइड में, बाकी सब जगह पे श्रिंकेज आ रही है. Are we, and by the way, the billionaires that you say that you haven't met, we're trying to do a deal with one of them, or actually 2 of them, and I can tell you they are billionaires. And they're billionaires in dollar terms, but they cannot declare their wealth in
We have
Pakistan.
those. We don't have declared. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's so unfortunate that we have this kind of distortion in the economy. But मुझे ये बताएं कि with this kind of distortion, जब आप statistics निकालते हैं, तो how do you do the decision making? Because as a private sector, what we've started doing is कि हम official statistics नहीं देखते.
No, you have so much of statistics.
बहुत
You
अच्छा.
guys should share with us as well.
data.
I mean, just tell me what kind of indicators you think the economy is not slowing
Big
down.
data.
Yeah,
Like, what kind
I
of
think
data?
I think what is I'm finding this discussion very very interesting because one thing is the private sector is doing fine, keep the government off our backs, and the IMF program should be used to discipline the government. People will deliver. That's one message. The second thing I'm hearing, which is even more interesting, is that the economy is not as bad as you think it is, because if you look at the telephony data, which is a good proxy for GDP, there's no hint that the economy is shrinking. There's no hint that there is stagnation in the economy. These are very fresh perspectives.
Ijaz, you know this tyranny of measurement. When you have 45% of economy outside the official net, your GDP calculations are capturing only 55% of the economy. What she is talking about are the people who are outside the formal economy. They are all informal. And that is propelling the wheels of the economy today. They are doing the employment. In my latest book, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, 80% of the employment in all 3 countries is in informal sector. It is not in the formal sector. Despite 6-7% growth in India and Bangladesh, their formal employment is stagnating. It's declining. So we have to I agree with what you're saying. We have to take into consideration it's not a 350 billion economy. In my reckoning, it is a 700 billion economy.
I think these are good points because, I mean, my little anecdote comparing my driver's salary with Sujit Bhalla's driver's salary, after allowing for exchange rate, after allowing for cost of living differences, was turning out to be very similar. So there's a lot going on in the economy, aside from the headline news that you captured in the newspapers. Do well to pay attention to those details. Let's have some more questions. Naved, first you then.
I just want to know, you suppose that is this it is different or not? And I think it's different for the reason already mentioned by some people. Nobody's going to give us any money now. So there is nobody going to bail us out, and that has been our problem every time before somebody, somewhere we got the money to go on the eating binge. So that binge is not going to happen. But the problem is that there is a political economy issue, or the people who control power here, they would then have to give up some of the power, they would have to give up some of the controls that they have. Question is, will they or won't they? It's not that they are looking at it from the maximizing the economics or economic growth or whatever. They're looking from the power dynamics. And will they give up the power or not? And I think that is critical. I'm very heartened to hear what you were saying. All the firms are looking for exports. Saw this ad of the sugar industry saying, deregulate and let us, don't set prices, let us export, etc. So clearly something is happening. Domestic market is not growing in the sense that maybe it might be, but not really growing. So if any firm is going to expand, they are going to have to export. So that is happening. Question is, will the powers that be allow this to happen? Will they sit by and allow the youth and the dynamic forces to continue to grow? Or will they somehow quell it? And that is the $1 billion question. I always, sorry, just one point. I was always optimistic that ultimately this will work out because of these issues. But then there are examples like Myanmar, where countries have gone and decided, no, we're not going to allow this to happen. So I hope we are not going to be in Myanmar. I hope we are going to be Vietnam. And if we continue on this, it's not going to be because of any structural reforms or anything like that. It's just going to be the pressures of the economy will push it in that direction. Thank you.
I really think that this conversation is going in the right direction. Yeah, Amal.
Yeah, I just want to add, just want to say something जो डॉक्टर नवेद बात कर रहे थे. मेरी रिक्वेस्ट ये है कि जो powers that be हैं, the real powers that be हैं, they don't listen to us and they definitely don't listen to the common man, but they do sometimes listen to experts like you. जब आप लोग अपना write-up prepare करते हैं, आप pessimism के बजाय थोड़ी सी optimism की तरफ और specific interventions के ऊपर अगर conversation start करें, maybe we'll get somewhere. I don't have the language or the data points or the background or the training to be able to talk to them as an expert. I can only tell them, or the private sector can only tell जो anecdotal evidence या जो हमारी learning हुई है, again from our perspective and our prism. We do look to you as experts to actually take our message forward.
So,
हाशिम यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं. He is a technocrat and a politician both. जब भी कैबिनेट में हम प्रपोजल लेके गए हैं रिफॉर्म्स की, तो वो कहते हैं कि जी डॉक्टर साहब तो अपना थैला लेकर कराची चले जाएंगे, जब हम अपने कॉन्स्टिट्यूंसी में जाएंगे तो हमारा काला मुंह होगा, क्योंकि आप कह रहे हैं कि हमें नौकरियां नहीं देनी हैं, हमने डेवलपमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर नहीं देना है, हमने मेरिट पे वहाँ पर लोगों को एसपी और डीसी लगाना है, फिर हमारा काम क्या है? ये तो चले जाएंगे, हमारा काला मुंह होगा. That's the answer to your question.
अच्छा, इस इलेक्शन में थोड़ा चेंज हुआ है, ये भी बताएंगे हाशिम.
okay, so at some point, Hashim, you'll have to speak. So I'm allowing you to keep your powder dry. but at some point you'll have to fire.
I think it's a very important.
Very important question. You see,
Will they be willing to accept this
Right,
change?
right.
Where
So-
some loss of power.
so lots of us have been looking at the economy from different angles. What has happened because of the power play, etc.? The way I look at the economy is that we have the way we've managed the exchange rate, the way we manage the tax structures, etc. Our private sector energy was diverted to the $30 billion remittances that this country was getting every year. $30 billion a year is 8.5% of GDP. It's a lot of money. And we've been getting it for the last 30 years. The private sector shifted its focus to getting profits out of that. Instead of the global market, which may be $300 billion worth. But the costs of making this transition from focusing on the domestic $30 billion to the global market of $300 billion, that's the adjustment that needs to be made. And I'm very happy to hear that you are seeing that the private sector is beginning to do that. I'm very happy to hear from Akila, another private sector representative, that you're beginning to see that. Question is, can this be sustained? Will we again interfere with the exchange rate market to start sending the wrong signals? That remains to be seen. And that's the power play that you and others were talking about. Maruf.
All right, great discussion. So thank you for sharing your perspectives. Two questions. One is just for Ishrat Saab. Is there space for elite bargaining? I mean, we've been talking about political economy constraints and so on. And the second question is for all the panelists. I mean, I think we're saying that the private sector can lead, and I agree with, repatriation of funds issues and so on for investors. I was an investor almost 20 years ago when nobody was investing in tech in Pakistan. In fact, wrote the second check for a company here. But I would like you to tease that apart a little bit. Let's talk about the crowding out effect that happens. There's not really private sector lending that happens in this country, right? With chand the firms jo ameer ho jayengi, that's not going to solve the broader economic issues. SMEs pe hum tawajjuh nahi dete. Banks lend to government. So we know all those issues. But I'd like to hear your perspective. How do we turn that ship around? Because there is a lot of rent seeking. Even the tech industry, often their industry groups ask for tax breaks. I mean, there's much better asks out there. So is our private sector really able to lead, or are we suffering from human capital accumulation issues?
Ishrat, it was addressed to you.
This elite bargain is a very ephemeral phenomena. It can be theoretical abstraction, but in practical ways it is difficult. I'm not a student of politics, but as an ordinary citizen, I thought the elite bargain completely broke down in 2024 elections, when against all the odds, the younger generation of this country came out and voted against the elite interests. To me, this is a beginning. And if we had followed that up faithfully, the condition of this country would have been much better. I also feel that if you had not, that the powers that be had not displaced Nawaz Sharif in 2017 or Imran Khan in 2022, the economic conditions in 2024 would not have been as awful as they are today. That is my belief. So I see that elite bargain is already, breaking down, and the elite classes are losing their grips. They follow it up. Don't have artificial constructs in order to perpetuate the elites. Let the river flow its natural course rather than obstruct it.
Yeah, the finance.
I would definitely like
Yeah.
Ashish to speak on
This is it. This is it. Are you part of the bargain or not?
No, he's been on the other side of the bargain for a long time.
I didn't
but
want to
is he,
put you on the spot again.
is it
Well, I had questions of my own, which I will also request the esteemed panelists to kind of shed light on. I think what Ali earlier said, I feel that a few exogenous factors, a few internal factors, the agents of change right now are too many. So if we feel that even after this program is going to be a repeat, I don't think so. I feel that in the age of artificial intelligence, in the age of the amount of information dissemination which is taking place, the rural urban divide clearly has pretty much disappeared in this country in terms of, be it on the political landscape, be it on the economic also, it's changing quite substantially. And I think the private sector stimulus, Ali very rightly put it, of trying to now focus on areas, moving away from rent seeking to an export oriented sort of an orientation, internalizing that within the business families or even in smaller cottage industries, is the harbinger of change. I personally feel that this type of introspection was long overdue. I think that if we firstly this stability as in that in terms of the IMF definition, even if we have achieved it, I think across board the understanding is very much there that there is no other savior coming for Pakistan except for the Pakistanis themselves. And that is going to inculcate a lot of change. And no matter what happens, our demographics itself are going to dictate change one way or the other. This new youth, this youth bulge, be it how we direct it, how the overall policies take shape on the economic side or otherwise, I feel that a change is coming. And I personally feel that whenever we see our Pakistanis abroad also, somehow our orientation has been to end up in the top percentile, mostly if we are, if we have the right set of environment provided to us. So I remain positive in the longer term on where we are going from here. My question to the panelist is, in the prescription of the IMF and the conditions which they've laid out and what the suggestions have been, what changes would you have made had you been part of that program, of this current program? So what would you either add or subtract from the current program as we go through it? Thank you.
So I can share my piece with you. Number one, and the tyranny of taxation being imposed on the compliant, already tax-paying population. Number one priority is that you are creating disincentives, both for the professionals whose salaries you are now 45% of their salaries are now being taxed. And industry and exports are suffering because of that. You have untapped resources in 45% of the sectors. Bring them in through artificial intelligence and data analytics, merge the databases. They didn't have the sale tax and the income tax talking to each other. IRS has its own vertical and VBOC has its own vertical. They weren't talking to each other. This can be done. Second, your regulatory framework, both at the federal, provincial, and local governments, is too cumbersome, too consuming of not only the time, but also the money. Your face is what? SHO, Tehsildar, labor inspector. These are the people who represent the government. You create the capacity at the local governments where the confrontation takes place between an ordinary citizen and you. Empower the local governments. You can't have 30, you were a finance minister, can you continue to supervise 35 districts, primary schools sitting from Lahore? You cannot do that. Number 4, that you try to create an environment which Ijaz has been repeating, get the government off the back. In 1994-95, I had my first conversation with Mr. Harish Mehta, who was the director of NESCOM. And I said, how come the Indian government, with all its controls, has let the IT industry take off? He said, they didn't know what we were doing. They were off the back. And by the time they discovered, we had grown so big, they couldn't do anything else. Get the government back. This is what the IMF should have done. Rather than saying, oh, this is the target of 12 trillion, and this is how you do it, which is you are creating disincentives, both for the private sector as well as the professionals. I go all over the country at the universities. I've never heard 2 years down before that, the kids, both boys and girls, asking, which are the countries where I can get a visa easily? Or which are the universities where I can get admission easily? This question was never posed to me 2 years ago, but now this is a constant, from Gilgit-Baltistan all the way to Gwadar. Those are the kind of things which IMF should have done.
Just to, there are organizations that actually watch the IMF and assess its performance. The view out there is not very good about the IMF. The biggest issue really is the way the IMF programming is done. It's not giving sufficient space to countries that are struggling with climate change issues, for example. Countries like Pakistan will need to spend extra money than they've been spending so far in order to adapt to the climate change that's going to happen, that where Pakistan will bear the brunt. The kinds of investments needed to do that, those are not allowed for in the IMF framework. That's one part of the IMF programming that will need to be revisited by the IMF. There's a lot of pressure on the IMF to do that. Secondly, IMF programming shrinks growth, which is okay for countries that go into the IMF programming episodically. But countries that go into repeated IMF programs, they're using the standard approach means that you choke off growth for 15 years, which is what Pakistan has seen. So there's a lot of pressure on IMF to rethink programming in countries where you have repeated cycles of balance of payments crises. So those pressures are coming on the IMF from outside. This is aside from the kinds of issues that Ishrat has met, which are all local issues. Now, having said that, Pakistan desperately needs something like the IMF to keep the government off our back. Varna, the powers that be will overvalue the exchange rate because they're consumers. And if you're a consumer, you want to import and you want to make imports cheap. They will overvalue the exchange rate, and all the incentive for private sector to export will disappear. So we need the IMF to keep the government off our back, but at the same time, IMF programming needs to become more sophisticated, and that will require expenditure tracking in a much more sophisticated way than the IMF programs do so far. That the money actually meant for climate change adaptation is actually spent on climate change adaptation. Those kinds of expertise IMF will have to acquire in order to deal countries like ourselves. But I think Ali wants to make a point.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in Pakistan case, the IMF is part of the problem and solution, but we need IMF for the reasons you said so. But it need to be go out of the red and move up. We need to get rid of the IMF as well. I mean, we cannot do within the frame of IMF. And what Ishad Saab said that this election has changed the dynamics. The development spending and the court kachari things are not making people win. It's a different thing people making. And the powers that be in Lahore, where they drive all the power from since inception of this country, are being challenged here. So they're rethinking as well. It takes some time to internalize. But they will. And eventually, what kind of a development and what kind of a path we would have, that would be the with the elite bargain. We have to do away with the IMF as well. I think I'm very clear on that. We have to get rid of the mindset, the IMF, World Bank, and all that. That's been there in past 50 years, and that's done no good for them. I mean, seeing the projects of World Bank through and through, and the kind of money they spend and kind of returns we get versus like 1/10 of the money spent by Jazz are giving much better return. So we need people like Jazz to come in and invest, not like those development agencies to work. That's, I think, is the thing.
I wanted to go back to Maruf's question. I mean, absolutely, the space, there's been a crowding out for the private sector. And I thought it was really interesting that you brought up SMEs. And one thing that we haven't touched upon so far is public goods. What is the kind of enabling environment that is present when you go and talk to micro entrepreneurs? They talk about wages, but they talk about electricity, they talk about public goods, the health sector, they talk about education for their children, much more. Those are problems that these micro entrepreneurs are facing. MFIs तो हैं, credit मिल जाता है, लेकिन मेरे वो बात करते हैं कि बच्चे जो हैं उनको आप हॉस्पिटल नहीं ले जा सकते हैं, हस्बैंड जो है उसने इतनी सारी जमातें पढ़ी हुई हैं लेकिन उसको नौकरी नहीं मिल रही है. And when you talked about the 45% tax rate that the professionals are paying, I mean, I don't mind paying that high tax. I mean, I get no public goods at all. So going back to the IMF program, one of the biggest issues, and I think you talked about this earlier, is there's no space for doing development spending at all. That's one of the first things that gets cut. And it's the state of our education system, the state of our public health system, because of which we are consistently in the issues that we are. I don't think we can deny the state of our human capital. We cannot turn a blind eye to it. Until that doesn't get solved, for which you need that fiscal space, I think it is sad that we have just given 22,000 schools to the private sector. There are absolute issues with the public sector, but the public sector, as a development economist, I feel, has such a big role to play in a country like Pakistan, where जहाँ पे डिमांड नहीं होगी फिर भी गवर्नमेंट का मैंडेट होगा कि उन्होंने जाकर प्रोवाइड करना है हर हालत में. प्राइवेट सेक्टर तो नहीं जाकर प्रोवाइड करेगा वहाँ पे. प्राइवेट सेक्टर won't care about quality. Unfortunately, our government sector is also not caring about quality. So we need to, the focus needs to be, how do we ensure, while keeping the government off the back, the IMF programs are still creating that space for the government to fulfill its primary role, which is provisioning of public goods, while also national defense and all of those other items that they have to provide. So, and that's where I think the SME sector also comes in. What is the space for them, given there's no public goods?
So, sorry, sir. Sir, it's an exchange. No, it's not. But my point is that as a young person in Pakistan, I feel that though there is some stability, things are not improving because there is no improvement in judicial system. I just wanted them to.
Just one small question.
Thank you so much. So I am a student from LUMS and I'm currently in bachelor's. And my question revolves around the idea that you talked about how economy is not very stagnant right now. However, we see news every day that Shell has left Pakistan and Total Parco is also leaving and stuff that big companies are leaving. That creates a lot of gap in the job market. And given that my age people are generally, as Harishra talked about, we're hoping to leave Pakistan for a better future. That's everyone he's talking about this. So for me personally, I was very motivated to stay in Pakistan. But given that the economic situation is currently, and given that we rely on remittances so much on our budget as well, so what do we expect in the future regarding the job market and regarding the job market?
Let me first correct you. The Shell and Total and 11 other foreign companies are selling their shares to the other multinational companies, foreign companies, not to Pakistan. And 5 local companies are selling their shares to the foreign companies. In today's dynamic world, it is the reshuffling of the positions of the multinationals. They have to get out of business in the downstream industry, for example, to concentrate on upstream. So this is the strategic objectives of the companies. And there is a capital surplus in UAE and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman and other GCC countries. And that's why they are buying Shell and they are buying Total, because they have the surplus.
No,
They're buying Telenor
Yeah,
also. So that I just wanted to correct you.
So I think your concern is absolutely the right concern, but a little bit of perspective might help. Guess which country nationals are the largest in numbers crossing into United States illegally from Mexico who are not Latin American? Indians.
Yeah.
Here's a country that tells the whole world how well they are doing. They've got
But I think-
how many billions of. So this young people wanting good opportunities for themselves, this will continue even when the economy rebounds. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing better.
What
But
I
let
can
me,
A perspective.
but maybe I can give you my example. When I started my career jazz के अंदर, तो उसमें डॉक्टर साहब जो हैं उसके कुछ अरसे के बाद he went to State Bank और 99 का इंसिडेंट हुआ एंड देन उसके बाद पाकिस्तान से इसी तरह एग्जोडस हुआ था, मास एग्जोडस ऑफ पीपल, जो कि आजकल हो रहा है. I was one of the few people who stayed, but honestly speaking, the reason why I'm here today is partly because of what Dr. Saab did in State Bank, because उस वक्त भी jazz impacted था, and we saw how he literally held on to the country and brought it around along with the team that he had. So जो faith होती है ना, that sometimes allows you to take certain decisions. What will happen in the next few years is that majority of you will leave. The people who are left behind will enjoy the growth that the country will go through. And then you will see your career growing very rapidly also, because you will be one of the few smart individuals left in the country. But that's a risk that you need to take.
The other thing, one of your question was like, there are not enough jobs in the market. I think you're absolutely right on that. But there are jobs that you can do from Pakistan, living in Pakistan, and be part of that remittances, and you can save tax.
So I really need to do only 2 more questions.
Rizwan, I've come from Islamabad. I'm a lawyer. Very short question. So, I mean, we haven't discussed the role of the SOEs and the impediment they pose to economic recovery. अब प्राइवेट सेक्टर को जब आप एसओईज में लेके आएंगे, स्पेशली डिस्कोस को जैसे प्राइवेटाइज करने की बात की, ऑन पेपर इट्स अ गुड आइडिया, लेकिन आपने के इलेक्ट्रिक की मिसाल दी. अब के इलेक्ट्रिक के कुछ फिगर्स तो अच्छे हैं, लेकिन अक्सर लोगों को ये पता नहीं कि वो पिछले 10 साल से 1400 मेगावाट ग्रिड से फ्री बिजली ले रहे हैं, जिसके लिए वो पे नहीं कर रहे. इसी तरह इत्तिसालात का जो है तो सही, अब आपको पता है उसका, आई मीन, so that's the first thing. They don't have a... No, I can discuss that with you later. So similarly, we give the example of things like Jazz and their performance, but effectively Jazz, PTCL, they're cartelizing the market. We have down from 5 only 3 MNOs left. तो प्राइवेट सेक्टर इसी तरह PTCL में आया तो वहाँ पे भी there's a lot of horror stories कि किस तरह गवर्नमेंट के इंटरेस्ट को नुकसान किया गया. So when we bring in the private sector in this, and we have the same babus regulating them who have run it all to the ground, how do we make sure that the private sector does not continue the rent seeking that it has been doing?
I think you reflect the popular opinion in Pakistan that anything the private sector does is either collusion or cartelization. Who is the beneficiary of this cartelization? I am. On the Jazz and China Mobile and Telenor, I get a price. That is not important. Important is that I as a consumer, I'm spending 1/10 of I used to spend on telephone calls, international telephone calls. What mean? ये तो आप जवाब
ओके सो मैं आपको बिल्कुल जवाब देती हूँ. जब स्टेट बैंक ने 2 साल अली साहब ने कहा कि जी प्राइवेट सेक्टर पैसे वापस नहीं डालता. अनफॉर्चुनेटली टेलीकॉम्स एक ऐसी इंडस्ट्री है कि जो हर साल 40 से 45 बिलियन पर कंपनी वापस डालती है इस मुल्क में. लेकिन हम वापस किस तरह डालते हैं? पार्ट ऑफ इट इज़ 30% इज़ लोकली स्पेंट, 70% इज़ इम्पोर्टेड फ्रॉम चाइना. जब स्टेट बैंक ने रोका था इम्पोर्ट, उसमें हमारी इम्पोर्ट भी रुकी थी. वन ऑफ द रीजन्स वाई यू सी हॉरेबल कवरेज एवरीवेयर बिफोर द फायरवॉल केम इनटू प्ले was because we were horribly behind the import targets that we had to improve our capacity and our capex. Having said that, I think जब आप बात करते हैं ना कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर क्या कंट्रीब्यूट करता है, द फैक्ट कि टेलीकॉम्स बड़े अरसे तक किसी को समझ नहीं आई थी एंड रेगुलेशंस नहीं उसके ऊपर सही कर रहे थे लोग, उससे फ़ायदा ये हुआ कि मुर्गी की प्राइसेस की तरह टेलीकॉम्स वर वन ऑफ द लोएस्ट इन द वर्ल्ड. जब गवर्नमेंट को जिस दिन से ये बात समझ आई है कि इससे पैसा बनाया जा सकता है, and they did something similar to what we are now recommending that we do to the IPPs, they defaulted on their commitments to us. And हमारे licenses की price when we went into renewals were increased by 2.5 times. And they were dollar denominated at a time कि जब इजाज़त नहीं, मतलब ये आपकी devaluation चल रही थी. Last 4 years, the telecom industry has paid $2 billion to the government. Which, and guess what? IMF के प्रेशर में आके गवर्नमेंट ने झूठ बोला और उस पैसे को अपने इनफ्लो में दिखाया. हालांकि अंडर द PTA regulations that money was supposed to stay with PTA and it was supposed to be reinvested back in the telecom sector. That has not happened. So you need to understand that a lot of things are happening around you जिसका आपको पता नहीं चलेगा, because unlike the textile sector हम लोग जाके रोज़ शोर नहीं मचा रहे होते. But again, when government does selective intervention, then they distort the picture for everyone.
मैं थोड़ा इनकी बात को ऐड कर तो फिर बाकी आपका जवाब दे दूँ. एक तो ये है कि ये यहाँ पे फिर जब ये इन्होंने स्पेक्ट्रम पे स्पेंड करना होता है, उसके लिए उन्हें स्पेक्ट्रम खरीदना होता है, उसकी गवर्नमेंट बड़े पैसे मांगती है, वो भी इनका गवर्नमेंट से झगड़ा पड़ रहा है. फिर चाइना मोबाइल जो है वो इनको बड़ा तंग करता है. वो कहता है मैंने प्राइस नीचे लेके जानी है और मैंने मार्केट करनी है, जिससे टेलीनॉर तो चला गया. अब ये लोग जो हैं दूसरी सर्विसेज में जा रहे हैं, विच इज़ गुड फॉर यू. अब ये जैज़ की जो अदर सर्विसेज आ गई हैं, जैसे वो आजकल हाँ वो कहते हैं गोइंग विद दैट. और दूसरा PTCL की बात की तो PTCL की प्राइवेटाइजेशन वाज नॉट अ प्राइवेटाइजेशन, दैट वाज फ्रॉम वन गवर्नमेंट ओन्ड कंपनी टू अनदर गवर्नमेंट ओन्ड कंपनी एहतसालात. और वो नहीं के इलेक्ट्रिक में हुआ है, नहीं के इलेक्ट्रिक में हुआ है ना कम नहीं के.
लेकिन आपको पता है कि जब PTCL ने प्राइवेटाइज किया था तो पूरे मुल्क में 3 मिलियन लाइंस थी. अभी आप मुझे ये बताएं ब्रॉडबैंड कितना है? डू यू नो, डज एनीवन हैव अ नंबर?
100 मिलियन प्लस है ना आपका टोटल.
100 million plus people have access to broadband and it's not through PTCL, it's not through the monopoly. It's only through the private sector.
Absolutely, absolutely. अच्छा मुझे अब मैं इनका के इलेक्ट्रिक का जवाब तो दे दूं. के इलेक्ट्रिक की अपनी थ्योरी गलत थी.
I just have one question for Akila. आपने You alluded to that the economy is growing as per the data sets which you come across. थोड़ा उस पर ज़रा बता सकते हैं आप? Could you further expand on that? What are those signs which you are seeing in the economy which are showing कि rather than shrinkage इसके अंदर एक positivity नज़र आ रही है, growth नज़र आ रही है? So that's one.
So my question is, like political risk is everywhere, right? So, for example, if there is Ukraine conflict or Gaza conflict, that's impacting globally, and the organizations like World Bank or Asian Development Bank, they're projecting stagnant growth globally. So, what's the beacon of hope in Pakistan going forward? If once the IMF program is completed, so what would be the major sectors of economy that Pakistan should be focusing on going forward?
Thank you. So a quick question. So again, what Hashim asked about the growth and whether you can tell between rural and urban, because that goes back to early, I've seen the figure 6%. For rural, at the same time you're running out of working capital at the farming level. The uptake of urea, as you pointed out, has really gone down. I see next 6 to 8 months, we'll see at the wheat sowing if we're going to go into major food shortages in the coming future. So what was the source of this 6% growth? And what do you see in the medium term for the agriculture sector? I think you need to have a policy exchange on agriculture because we're in for trouble from where I'm sitting and see agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sunny Sajjad. Ji, first of all, half of my question has been asked by the gentleman sitting in front because I practice agriculture in the borderlands of Punjab and Dera Ghazi Khan. But the other question which I wanted to ask was that having discussed all the, topics, do optics matter at all? Because my problem is I come from a small city. I see things from a different lens. Seeing things from periphery to the center rather than somebody sitting in Lahore or Islamabad seeing things outwardly. So, for example, on one side I see there's massive inflation, no development work taking place, sanitation problems, sewers not being laid, so on and so forth. On the other side, I see the civilian bureaucracy spending massively, no question of austerity at all. Every single day I see my deputy commissioner or RPO or DBO or AC or Tehsildar coming up with another security vehicle. So, it's more of a question of political economy. What do you want the people to understand? On one side, people are not, agriculture is being suppressed at every nook and corner or any other sector. And then we see the big government, which, is not willing to, let alone compromise, they're rubbing it in the face of the people. So do you think that will help? Even if the economy grows, I don't mind that. That's a different thing. Economy will grow at its own pace. But I think, don't you think the optics should be taken care of for stability, which is then the primary requirement for economy?
So basically, people want to know more about what you see, which shows growth, and specifically people who deal with agriculture, who are interested in agriculture, are saying agriculture में तो कोई growth ही नजर आ रही, तो आपको क्या चीज नजर आ रही है? आप बताएं.
So I think ये दोनों data points जो है वो बहुत important हैं, and I also wanted to maybe allude to it. जो growth हमें नज़र आ रही है ना वो short term consumption items में नज़र आ रही है, and that's partially a part of our culture. हम लोग कल के लिए नहीं बचाते unlike our surrounding areas. So statistics आप लोगों को ज़्यादा बेहतर पता है, but from what I understand and my information may be obsolete, but Pakistan has one of the lowest saving rates in the entire region. हम लोगों के पास 2 रुपए भी होते हैं, हम जाके उसका कुछ ख़रीद लेते हैं. अब चाहे वो मेरी कोई चीज़ ख़रीदें, चाहे उनकी कोई चीज़ ख़रीदें, चाहे उनकी कोई चीज़ ख़रीदें, लेकिन वो ख़रीद लेते हैं. सो इफ़ यू इन्वेस्ट इन अ कंज्यूमर गुड टुडे, in 5 years' time, you're bound to be in the money. Anybody who is dealing in consumer goods will tell you exactly the same thing. This is what we are also seeing, that retail continues to grow, and it continues to grow at double digits, which is extremely not reflective of the 3% growth that you're otherwise talking about. What gives us sleepless nights, and that may not just be me, but maybe other companies also, is the fact that while we can do intervention on a lot of things, we cannot do intervention around wheat. वो government का ही issue है. I don't know how many of you are aware or not, but wheat के अंदर severe distortions हैं between the north and the south, between Punjab and Sindh, between Balochistan and Kashmir. And there have been severe shortages for the last 3 and 4 years, even during the time of bumper crops. It does fundamentally mean कि जब आपके लोग भूखे होंगे किसी एक साइड के ऊपर, तो they are going to be extremely unhappy with the other side of the country. And that means that it will be a lot more than the political instability or the terrorist activities that you see right now. When en masse hungry people come out on the street, it's a totally different ball game. And that is the kind of instability that even we don't want to see.
Yes. The thing, you're absolutely right. There's a short-term consumption going on, but when we see the lifestyle have adjusted in the past 3 years, any consumer item you see, you take the beverages, Coke, Pepsi, and all that, they're seeing 20-30% decline from the peak, right? Bikes, they've seen like 30-40% decline from the peak. Cars sales are reduced to 30% only, right? Cement, steel, name anything you, and then
मुनाफे में कमी हुई है.
No, I'm talking about volumes, ma'am, volumes. I'm talking about volumes in tonnages, in numbers of units, in AC units, fridge units. They're down 25%. I'm telling you the numbers.
It's still more than what it was 5 years ago.
Of course.
That's the
I'm saying that
that's the growth trajectory we look
your
at.
economy was 100 billion 20 years ago. It's 300 billion because it grows 6% every year. That's how compounding it. But we are talking about where we were 3 years ago. We are down. That's what I've initially said. We are somewhere where we are. Many numbers are somewhere to 2017 and all that. But that's a different thing. But you're right. We consume. That's but coming to your very interesting question, if you have you seen the FBR regulation plan or FBR transformation plan? There's something very much like there's 110 pages slide. If you see the last 10-15 slides, there's something on the custom controls on the borders end as well, and that's what probably going to happen when you have shortage in wheat and all that next year. Of course, there's going to be shortage of wheat because there is a policy which is being implemented during the caretakers, which was not said policy, but that was the policy very carefully created and implemented, is about not having the wheat support price by just importing the wheat right before the time of that, and that has yielded in terms of reducing the prices. And now you're bound under the IMF program to not going to provide the wheat support price next year. So in a way, it's a creative destruction because we all know the distortion and all that in the wheat as well, as many people grow it when they don't need to grow it, and average yield is 30 to 20, the 40 mods versus the 80 to 90 where it should be, and there's some areas where it is 50-60, some areas where 20-30. Why are we producing where it is 20-30? Why don't we produce some other crop over there? This may happen, but in the meanwhile, during that happen, some farmers would get crushed. Their livelihood would go crushed, and if we don't be able to import in time, there are going to be a food shortages and all that. So all those consequences can happen, but this is going to happen in the next few years, and that's the biggest risk I see in this country as of now.
To this gentleman about, I ask you to ponder why maize, rice, potatoes, production in last 1 decade has shot up like anything, that maize is now being exported. You have become the third largest exporter of rice because there was no intervention by the government. Punjab government, the former finance minister is here, was subsidizing the big farmers from whom the procurement was done, and it was not passing on to the consumer, but it was preempted by the flour mills. This is what the distortions in the market is. Now, neither the farmer is getting any benefit, the small farmer, nor a consumer is getting the benefit. So it's a good to get the government out of the wheat markets. Sure, absolutely, you're right. No, you cannot. You cannot have any restrictions on the movement. If you have restriction, then you are not talking about a unified national market. You remember 3 years ago, the ECC said the price of wheat will be so much. Sindh government said no, it will be 2,000. Rahim Yar Khan, his district, was flooded with wheat because it was all going across to Sindh.
Okay, so we have 5 more minutes. If I can take one final answer question. Silent.
So I have a very brief question, right? So we're talking about, increasing the exports, right? So my question is, how can we improve the export competitiveness and productivity of our manufacturing sector?
It's a research question, not a brief question.
It's brief in the number of words, but not in scope.
The similar situation is in the sugar industry. The government doesn't plan to fix the sugarcane price, and one moment they are also not allowing export when the sugar price is almost $600. They didn't allow when it was almost 720 4 months ago. So these policy decisions impact what we were discussing.
These are not even policy decisions, these are selective interventions.
Yes, yes.
They end up with market distortion.
One thing I would like to add, which actually he was, our export, if we increase our export, that will definitely help us come out of this scenario which we are discussing. For the last 3 years, imports were actually increased, and not our exports are so much. So, and that is what comment I would like to add, which he has mentioned. Thank you. Thank you.
So, okay. 3 final questions.
Sajid, for your answer, there's a chapter in Malia Lodi's latest book called Enhancing Export Competitiveness. You better read that, okay? Brief answer, he wanted a brief answer.
आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगी इन 3 सवालों पे? I'm interested in what Dr.
मैं export पे नहीं comment कर
So अगर आप हमारी preceding decade के graphs देखें, not this decade, but 2009 to 2014, 15 के graphs देखें, industrialization, manufacturing sector के, employment का slightly upward trend है, and आपको value added का actually it's a pretty large downward trend. Just looking at those 2 lines, you can see that जो लोगों की employment हो रही है, they don't have probably enough capital to work with. And that's a major failing. We're not able to, 1, import the capital that we need. 2, we don't have the financial space within we don't have the credit market space within our economy. कि जिसको लोन चाहिए, जो आपका सवाल था, जिसको लोन चाहिए, जिसको different types of financial products चाहिए, क्योंकि there's so many different types of industry that we have. I mean, we always think about a heavy capital industry, but there's also SMEs and cottage industries. उनको उस किस्म का product नहीं चाहिए, जो कि आपकी heavy industry को चाहिए. So you need those nuances in your financial instruments. वो नहीं है. फिर तीसरा, आपकी local innovation नहीं हो रही है, R&D production नहीं हो रही है, and that goes back to the human capital, not just the human capital dilemma that we're in, but the justice system that we have. We know that if I invest in any in any innovation, that's, I don't know if I'll be able to keep it, if I'll be able to keep the profits from it. I am always scared that somebody's going to appropriate it from me. So मैं क्यों invest करूँ? So, and these are not just problems in manufacturing, these are also problems in agriculture. Agriculture में भी वही ग्राफ्स नज़र आ रहे हैं. Employment जो है वो feminize होती चली जा रही है और वैल्यू एडिशन आपको नज़र नहीं आ रही है, आपको उस किस्म की इन्वेस्टमेंट भी नहीं होती हुई नज़र आ रही है, क्योंकि वही सारे मसले हैं कैपिटल के, फाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स के, इनोवेशन के. सो until we don't fix the complementarities that need to be in place, we're not going to see that kind of innovation or the kind of exports that you're talking about. And I think ये सारा chapter में covered हो गया.
ये बिल्कुल है. मैंने
दूसरा मेरी रिक्वेस्ट ये होगी कि मैंने पहले भी जिस तरह अर्ज़ की, ये कौम एक नए सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट की अब जिस तरह का हमारा डेमोग्राफिक है अब उस तरफ जा रही है. तो जो करंट सिस्टम है गवर्नेंस का, इट इज़ नॉट डिज़ाइन टू डिलीवर मेरे मुताबिक, तो जो मेरा अपना एक्सपीरियंस रहा है. जब तक आपके गवर्नमेंट के टेयर्स के अंदर एक रोबस्ट लोकल गवर्नमेंट नहीं आएगा, तो आप जो उम्मीदें लगा के बैठे हैं कि एक सूबे में लाहौर में बैठ के एक आदमी 13-14 करोड़ के स्कूल एजुकेशन को देख रहा होगा, हेल्थ को देख रहा होगा. जब हमने मेयर्स की पोजीशंस को ग्लोरीफाई नहीं किया, जो कि एक्चुअल डिलीवरी होती है जिस लेवल पे हो जाती है, जब म्यूनसिपैलिटी सर्विसेज को हमने एक हकीकत नहीं बनाया, आपकी एक अवर्जन है टैक्स पे करने की, बट मैं यकीन दिलाता हूँ कि अगर हम बेनिफिट टैक्सेशन की तरफ जाते तो अगर आपकी अपना स्ट्रीट लाइट चेंज होता हुआ नज़र आता, सो यू वुड बी मोर रिसेप्टिव टू पेइंग दोज टैक्सेस. So my request would be, as a recommendation for your honorable CDPR board and you gentlemen, कि एक kindly इस पे भी हम करें कि this governance system needs to change. We need to have that third tier of government.
It doesn't need to change. The government needs to do what it's supposed to do, which is govern.
No, but his point is,
Instead
you
of-
have the three tiers.
Right.
You have got two tiers which are functioning right or
और
wrong,
तीसरा है।
or wrong, but the common man gets all his services at the local government level, and that's what he's trying to say, that it will be strengthened. That is what it is.
So मैं समझता हूँ कि हम गवर्नेंस का एंगल जो है वो एग्रीकल्चर के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में डिस्कस करते हैं. तो दोनों चीज़ें डिस्कस हो जाएंगी कि एग्रीकल्चर का इशू क्या है और उसमें गवर्नेंस का क्या रोल है, which will help us. So we'll be able to
But
address
why
that
don't we
question.
link it to the economy? Because frankly, अभी आपकी गवर्नमेंट क्या कह रही है? वो कह रही है जी मैं बिजली चलाऊंगा, मैं एयरप्लेन चलाऊंगा, मैं स्टील मिल चलाऊंगा, मैं बैंक चलाऊंगा, मैं सब चलाऊंगा, मैं लोकल गवर्नमेंट नहीं चलाऊंगा. So why are they not doing what they're supposed to do?
So I'll need to conclude now. Huh? So I'll come back to you. But talking about benefit taxation, this area where you're sitting, when it was originally conceived, it had 1.5 acre size houses. And it also had a public park. Because the houses were very large and they had their own little parks inside the houses, nobody paid attention to the public park. It was being looked after, but it was not really utilized. उसमें ये कनाल पार्क के बच्चे आके खेलते थे और फिर उसमें जुआ भी शुरू हो गया, लोग आके जुआ शाम को खेलते थे. But the local residents didn't care at all because they had their own private little parks inside their homes, which are very large homes. Then what happened, one of the houses was sold. I'm speaking of 90s. One of the houses was sold and they made townhouses. Instead of one house, there were now 20, 30 townhouses. They needed the park. So they formed an association. And they sent around a little note to everybody's homes. Okay, you know, if you just contribute 100 rupees a month, we'll be able to maintain the park, we'll be able to do everything. Nobody responded. उनमें से एक साहब ने ये किया कि लोकल जो लाइनमैन था वापडा का, उसको कुछ पैसे दिए और उसको कहा कि तुम ये जो बत्तियां हैं ना, जस्ट मेक श्योर कि ये बत्ती कोई फ्यूज ना हो इसमें। एक महीने के बाद उन्होंने फिर नोटिस किया 80% ऑफ द पीपल पेड 100 rupees. So benefit taxation, when people can see the results of it, मैं इस इलाके की बात कर, is a lot to say that. And that you can only demonstrate through strong local governments and delivering public goods. So let's discuss this in the context of agriculture. We'll be able to address both आप लोगों के concerns as well as the governance issue. Can the state deliver public goods for agriculture, and at what tier of the government that's done best? So let's do that, and I'll talk to you in setting up the panel, etc. बहुत शुक्रिया. This has been a great discussion. हम शुरू वो ऊपर मैक्रो से हुए थे, लेकिन we really got into deep structural reform. This is what structural reform actually is. We got into deep structural reform. So it's been a very, very good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you.